Hello, I'm Rob Wright. I'm the chief editor of Life Science Leader. For today's virtual executive roundtable, or it should be the executive virtual roundtable in EVR, we're going to be talking about how to accelerate biopharmaceutical startup companies' path to the clinic. I want to tell you a little bit about how this topic came about. So Pamela Contag is the CEO of BioEclipse Therapeutics, and I met Pamela at an event called the Life Sciences, Crush Life Sciences Leadership Meeting, and it was just prior to the annual JP Morgan Healthcare Conference this past January. And while I was there, Pamela and I had talked about, because we had scheduled an interview to talk about, some of the things that she was working on at BioEclipse, and we ended up developing it into this feature article that was in our May issue. And but when we were having this talk about her approach to building this startup, one of the things we got into a good conversation on was around CROs and the path to the clinic and how to do that fast. And so I carved that information out and built it into our CRO supplement special annual Leadership Awards issue. And there's this article in here, and you can see it right here. And it's called A Small Biopharma's View of Working with CRO. Now, what's interesting is both of these got a lot of positive feedback, but the CRO one, executives have a lot of questions for one another. And, Pam's been getting a lot of requests to do virtual roundtables and to get on calls with people that she's never heard of before who want to know more. And we thought, what a great opportunity for us to try and deliver more information on this topic. And Pamela said, hey, listen, let's bring Dara Lockert. She's the founder of Spannerwerks. She's been critical to my being able to do this. So I want to welcome today Pamela Contag, who is now a member of our editorial advisory board, and Dara Lockert, who is the founder and executive director of Spannerwerks. Good morning.
Hi, Rob. Thanks for having me. Good morning.
Hi, Rob. This is great. Hey, Dara. How are you?
Hi, Pam. Good to see you.
So, Pam, I wanted to start with you by asking you a question so why did you want to talk about this? I mean, because the reality is Pamela drove this topic. I didn't call Pam up and say, hey, let's do this roundtable. Pam said, I think we need to do a roundtable, and then we figured out how to do it. So tell me why you thought this was important, Pam.
Okay, so this is a big confession for me. This is my first company where I've actually taken something from the bench through to the clinic. And I've done different parts of it before, but this is the full path for me. And I was so excited about it because we have several high unmet need disease areas that are really underrepresented in clinical trials. And I wanted to approach that issue using this therapeutic from BioEclipse that I really believe in. And most of these disease areas are underrepresented in clinical trial because they are either very difficult or very expensive to address. So when you think about the challenges of just starting a therapeutic company and the difficulty in raising funds for projects that seem high risk or to address challenges, all the different things that you need to do, one of the first things you need to do with very little money is bring in the expertise, which is quite expensive. So the result is that if we need that expertise and there's not the money or time to hire what's required up front to jumpstart your company, then you'll burn too much funding and staffing up time in full-time employees, and then you'll learn down the line that maybe they weren't the right people, and maybe you hired them either too soon or too late, or they had the wrong expertise. So, a couple weeks ago, our board asked me, so how many people are working in the company right now? And so if I added up all the people that we're working with right now with our first enrollment of phase 1, which is, by the way, just about 30 days away, it's over 35 across many areas of expertise. And this is a lot of people, but they're not all full-time employees. They're not all on my staff. In fact, the majority represent the company, but they're not full-time employees in the company. So the key that I learned from early experience is to really source expertise through consulting partnerships. I've done this all along. I'm used to doing this. And really, a consulting partnership is your partner in managing both other partners and vendors effectively because they have the expertise. And that's what Dara Lockert represents. So when I say effectively, I mean as an integrated team. And Dara had already set this up in her consulting business. And she was the expert manager for the relationships between BioEclipse, our vendors, and our other partners.
So how did you get connected to Dara? I want to understand, like, is there a Consultants or Us website that you can go to, or?
Yeah, there must be, but there must be, but I don't know if there is. So as a CEO, my first job is to fund my company. And I've had a really unique opportunity in this area because I've been CEO of 2 other venture-backed companies. And so for this company, I was able to put together a very experienced board, legal team, auditors, IP experts, well before I raised the first round. So this board of directors and advisors understood that there would be critical gaps to close before raising the money for clinical trials. They knew that because they're from cell and gene therapy. You know, some of them have done startups before. And so they knew that the company had to demonstrate to future investors that there was a clear path to get to clinical trials. So basically what I'm saying is I knew a guy who knew a guy who knew Dara. So no, I'm just
That's
kidding.
how it works. That's the Consultants Are Us. There's a guy.
So one of my board members introduced me to a person who is now also on my board who knew Dara. And one is a highly respected super CFO of gene and cell therapy. And the other one is an MD who he's been a chief medical officer. He has run clinical trials before, and he has worked with Dara. And so they connected me with Dara. And so, you know, we knew that speed to the clinic with our best proof of concept therapeutic would be the most important part of our success as a company. And we also knew that, you know, this low cost to relevant clinical data can guide future products for our platform and really amplify the value inflection point. So that is the argument that I used with my board for doing this really at the time what was a relatively unique, serious, you know, outsourcing the staff. And because we did this, and this was also part of the argument with my board, not an argument, a discussion, okay. I think that we significantly early on de-risked the product's entry into future trials and ultimately entry into the market. So Dara's team was extremely value added.
So you knew a guy who knew a guy who knew Dara, but I would imagine you probably, I know you, Pam, you're pretty smart and savvy, and you're not just going to say, oh, this one looks good, I'll take that one. You probably interviewed several or many?
Yes, too many. I mean, I think I spent a lot of time talking to many different types of consultants too, big, small, individual.
So why Dara?
So I wanted to just kind of step in a bit. So it's great to start a relationship with the trust that's already there, but you don't always have that. So if you don't have that, you know, built-in experience set, one of the things to look for is the team that's coming to you, are they really listening to what you need, and are they providing the expertise in the gaps? So, you know, it's really important with a client when we meet a new company like this or a client that we realize what their strengths are, which is their science, usually the potential for their drug, their you know, they understand the mechanism of action and the value there, and bringing to them experts to help with their gaps. And if you have people that can really connect with them and really understand really understand how to get this forward, that builds trust really quickly.
No, I think that's true. And I will say that when I met Dara, the company was 3 people. So it was me, and sometimes my board members would help me interview people. But, you know, you're asking, why did I select Dara? So it's easy to say, oh, you know, I was looking for capabilities and, you know, a ready-made team of experts. But if we're going to be honest, first of all, it was clear that she had the capabilities. She came highly recommended. But we started talking, and honestly, she understood me and what I was trying to accomplish. And my first impression after, not a long meeting, but a normal meeting was, wow, you know, we're culturally aligned. You know, we can talk about things. We can say the hard things to each other, and there's this level of respect that I really value. And so what I first noticed was not only that she was experienced and outspoken, in case you haven't noticed yet, but she had the expertise needed, and she had access to those people. So it's kind of funny because I'd say, you know, I'm really worried here. I feel like we're not, you know, keeping up in this area. And she goes, oh, I know a person. So not only did I have a board guy who knew a guy who knew Dara, but then Dara knew somebody who knew somebody that could solve this problem. So the network that was created by, you know, this simple act of, you know, asking a pointed question to, you know, a board member got me this amazing network, and I couldn't have put it together by myself. And Dara always makes the point of the right talent. I hope you talk about this a lot, Dara, because this talent readiness really allowed us to hit the ground running. In fact, I didn't even have a full scientific team on board, and we were already talking about the exact experiments, the exact data, everything that we needed. And aligning the priorities without delay and without the overhead and the lag time of hiring was just so important to this company. So I love the team because they were interested in the product, shared their expertise, and, you know, we've had a lot of discussions about the philosophy of the clinical trial process, and I would just like to say that their team taught me a lot, and I really value that.
So, Pam, thanks for that. I want to transition to Dara because, Dara, we're probably making you blush. But, you know,
Go on.
we want to get to some thoughts about, like, because you've been in the industry for 25 years, right? And, you know, you've seen the difference in the progression between a startup of yesterday versus what's going on today. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that perspective of some of the differences, and we could work our way through that.
Sure. I've been in the industry for more than 25 years, and there was a time where the path to the market was entirely waterfall. So first came the money, and then came, you know, bringing on the C-suite, and each of those people bring on a whole team, and you staff up, and, you know, sometimes upwards of 80 people in your company. You're not even in the clinic yet, and then there's a delay, and so then you downsize. And then, you know, approval comes in, some more money, and then you hire again. And, you know, that's hard to do to people, but it's also not the way the world works today. Drug development, which has a long scientific R&D testing and trials, it's like aerospace. It's like defense now, that, you know, hiring is not the only way to go ahead. Now all the expertise is assembled in a different way. It's through partners. And so you have the key employees, and then you have your key manufacturing and research partners, and then you have partners to help you manage this. So, you know, Pam was explaining how she had 35 people working on her project, and she started with 3 employees. If 3 employees have 35 separate people to manage, that's complicated, and there's some things that slip, right? Instead, companies are now using partnerships to bring in expertise and manage that for them. And, you know, the advantage to this is that the companies are retaining value they're retaining value before they're not staffing up before they have that proof of concept, that, getting into the clinic and ideally having data from the clinic before they dilute their equity with a lot of employees.
Well, one of the things, we had talked about the hiring and then the part-time staff, and we were talking a little bit about what has changed, and you mentioned a little bit about the value proposition. Is there anything else that we wanted to make sure we covered?
So, it's really important to have your manufacturing partners, your manufacturing and your clinical partners to really match your company. They need to be high quality, and they need to be a scale, and you need to be a priority to them. And so, that's really important. And those things, if you pick the wrong partners for manufacturing or clinical trials, you're going to have costly delays. And so that's another important point. So, when you're hiring and staffing up, looking for people who've done the same phase as you, who've entered into the clinic, who's taken something from the science to the patient, those people will know how to make decisions so that you're doing the right thing early and you're delaying the right thing so you can retain your value and get to the clinic before you run out of money.
You know what, Dara, that is a really good point, because I know, Rob asked me earlier how many people I actually interviewed. And one of the things I noticed is that when I went to talk to big, CROs with a lot of project management capability, a lot of people, I felt that we were mismatched in a way. I felt that they had a way that they would step through the trial, and I'm sure it would be great, and it definitely was expensive. But I felt that your point of matching, our company to the trial team is really important. I didn't want the B or C team from a large CRO, because I was a small company. I wasn't a big pharma, so I couldn't garner that attention. So if you want the attention from an expert team, you have to find other ways to do it. And I think that's what Dara and I did together. We found a way to get this integrated team that also was very mission driven. And that was really, really important to me.
So Pam, I wanted to transition, because when we talked about, you just were talking about figuring out the expertise that was needed in working with Dara. So tell us what expertise BioEclipse needed and how you went about figuring that out.
So here's what I understood. The first thing Dara wanted to do was a gap analysis. And I said, that's not going to take very long because we only have gaps. So I think one of the things that, that Dara really supported me on was that, and I do give her a lot of credit, but I just want to say that it wasn't actually too long ago when she told me that, the whole team didn't have to recreate the story of the technology, the mechanism of action, the path to good science, because that was my strong point. That's part of why I've, been a CEO of 3 companies. And I not only know that, but I'm really happy to talk about it. But the truth is that Dara helped us understand the priority of filling those gaps. And yes, she did a gap analysis and she realized we were mainly gaps. And even though we did that, we still made some mistakes. And most of those mistakes were around hiring in-house people that didn't have as much expertise as Dara's team or couldn't integrate with Dara's team. And we just didn't have the time to train them in. And I think that was a mistake I learned from. So I've actually fired from my company more people than I have in my company today. So it was a very hard lesson, but it was, it was worth it. And so, the first priority gap that she taught me was how to tell the manufacturing story to the FDA. So we needed clear language that was understood, because our combination, of of our, immunotherapy is more than just putting two drugs in the same tube. They have these drug substances have synergy when they're combined. It's a unique property of our product, and the interesting thing about this therapy is both drug substances have actually been in the clinic before, but the data from that needed to be in some ways triangulated or translated to what it would mean to put our therapy in the clinic, and what was it about, our therapy. So even though that previous data gave our application of the FDA some legs, we needed to really describe and translate our specific product. So that was really step number one.
And then, but you were also talking about when you needed expertise, so full-time versus what could be outsourced. I mean, what did you end up landing on? Like, these are the things we had to have full-time.
Okay, so what we needed full-time inside the company was definitely a CEO, definitely a CFO, and then I felt that in order to, maybe this is a good time to say this and maybe it's not, but I'll just go ahead. We in-licensed technology, and I needed to, and so the quality of research that is required for submission to the FDA is very different than what academic research it is. And, Rob, you and I have talked about this before, but if I were to prepare the next generation of academic researchers, I would implore them to learn the discipline of GLP, GMP, documenting your science, what it means, what the controls are, how to validate studies. Because doing that meant when we hired a manufacturing team, we could tech transfer to that team, and that saves a ton of money. And so that was where I was at. After CEO, CFO, and somebody to do, operations, which by the way, we also outsourced. I needed to bring in a scientific team and start test running these assays, validating what, was either present or absent from the lab notebooks I got from, the various labs, and really convincing ourselves that we could do something that was robust and then tech transfer it to somebody that would make it GMP quality. So that was the hardest thing. So CEO, CFO, and then a small science team that really knew what they were doing.
So before I ask Dara a question, I'll just, with regard to your preparing academics, I think that's a really good point. It's because you're not just preparing them for academia, because Pam, you have a Ph.D. And when I was in my doc program, I know one of the things my goal was, I'm going to be a professor someday. Well, I'm not a professor, and there's people that are probably getting that Ph.D. and either entering industry or wanting to work at the FDA. And this would be great experiences for them to have in their bag to be ready for a variety of disciplines.
I think that's really true. And there's a bias against doing science in industry, but some of the finest science that I've ever done and that I've ever seen has come from industry. Granted, it comes from academics too, but industry is a great place to do science. That's, that is all I can say.
I'd like to emphasize the value about having your own, building a lab early in the startup of your company. You are much more nimble to answer the scientific questions that pop up early in process development, early in assay development, and early in when it's in your translating to the patients. You're much more nimble in your lab, and you know that science more than any contract development organization you might transfer this to. So I do emphasize that having the lab team that can really help you process development, transfer to your manufacturing, build your assays, and then look for those those signals in the clinic. So the biomarkers or the patient signals that are not your things you can order off the shelf.
That is so
I emphasize
true, Dara.
that.
Yeah, and remember that it doesn't go one way. It doesn't go just from the company laboratory to GMP. Remember that there was a time when the GMP group didn't have an assay up and running, and all of a sudden we get a call, hey, can we send you something and can you test it? And so we've been sending stuff back and forth to each other now ever since they started, which has been over a year ago. And it's been a really great relationship. And that discipline was transferred to my laboratory, and I'm just really excited about it.
Dara, one of the things we had talked about was strategic versus tactical expertise. So Pam was laying out, some of what she needed in-house and then what she needed to outsource. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about figuring out that strategic versus tactical expertise when you're looking at the outsource component.
Sure. So strategy, you need that to make your decisions, to make a case for the value of your product, and to make a case for why your phase 1 will build into the clinical development plan. You need to be able to really draw that out, and also identify how you're going to develop the product over time so that it's approvable with a label that's valuable, right? But you need the tactical expertise as well. So this is something that I really can't emphasize enough, is you need people that can think about things and give you advice, but then you need people that will roll up their sleeves and do the work. And there's a lot of work and a lot of people that have to do the work. And so, one of the things I always look for consultants that work with us is, can they think through things? Are they strategic? And are they the kind of person that unloads the dishwasher? Do they do the work? They can, write the IND, all those sections of the IND, and organize it really efficiently. Can they, write a engineering protocol or review it, get in the weeds and see what's, see what needs to happen there. So you need both. You need people to think things out, and then they need to be able to do stuff.
So one of the things I wanted to ask you about, Dara, because you've dealt with a lot of CEOs of startups, I would imagine, over 25 years. So if I was going to say, there's a bit of this art to being a CEO, what am I getting at?
Well, the first thing is, the CEO is spending investors' money. So at every phase, in each month and each day, really, they're managing their burn rate. And so, they need to focus on that mission to get into the clinical trial and to get data. How they're asking themselves, how can we get there reliably? Can we get there fast? And can we do, with quality? Can we get the most out of this money we're spending? How can we do that? And so each time they make a decision to spend money to go with a hire or with a vendor, they're asking themselves, do we buy this expertise or do we borrow it? So are we hiring and building labs and, office space, or are we borrowing this expertise until we can do it later? And it's a balance, because both of those things have value for the right people and the right timing. So that's a key item there.
So one of the things I wanted to bring Pam back in, because when you talk about getting that expertise, but how about keeping that expertise or keeping the vendor interested in your project? So, Pam, I wonder about you talking a little bit about that, because as CEO, you were very hands-on in getting in there, because we're going to start talking about speed here in a couple of minutes, and I want to make sure we get to that.
So for me, it comes down to culture. And this applies to employees and partners alike. In the old days, the culture that the CEO created was really within the company. And now we have to have that culture expand beyond the company, not only to our partners, but also into the clinic. And startups, like anybody, we rely on very strong relationships. and bringing, the right level of attention to the relationships is something that, first of all, a lot of people say about the United States. They say, we're transactional, we're not relationship oriented. I completely disagree with that. Across the world, our companies, our people, our management teams have to be relationship oriented. You have to, have that sensitivity to understand that other people are just trying to get their job done too. And so I would say that the number one thing is to pay attention to the relationships.
And also at the appropriate levels, because I know that you're going in as a CEO, and you commented to me, when we've had conversations over, the past few months about, getting to connect and meet people that you might not normally interact with, but now that you're the CEO, you want relationships at a variety of different levels throughout those other organizations that you're contracting with and CROs. So that the project doesn't fall off their desk on the floor and get stepped on a few times and not paid attention to. So, and now you're facing trying to maintain those relationships in this kind of current COVID-19 where you can't be in person all the time. So can you tell us a little bit about how you used to approach it and maybe how you kind of are approaching it now?
So, so this is a difficult thing as a CEO, and I've been the CEO of other companies too, and the CEO has sort of this unique power to help or hurt. And so when you say you go in and form relationships at different, levels of the organization, you really have to be cognizant of the fact that, you're the keeper of the keys on the finance, and you have, hiring and firing capability. And you cannot overtly wield that, that power or whatever you want to call it if you want to form a relationship. You want to go in and say, here's what I value about what you are trying to accomplish. But you also need to sometimes be able to say, hey, you know what, we're not getting there. And I would say that for me personally, and maybe even for me being a woman, that is one of the hardest things that I have to do, is go in and just say, hey guys, this isn't working for me. Or go in and say, even though it's not working for me, I value what you bring to the party. I think, Dara, one of the hardest decisions, by the way, that I had to make was when we had this really great clinical trial design early on. It was a 3+3, it was very traditional. And during this process, we routinely reached out to our network of people at all levels for a reality check. And this is how, I still look back and can't believe I did this. But midstream, we changed our traditional trial design to this beautifully structured new phase 1 Bayesian optimal interval design that was twice the size of our previous design, which in some ways seems crazy, but that design is going to have much more meaningful data. I think it was a better way to use investors' money, and we could not have done that if at every single level of our whole project team, people didn't, do a thumbs up, let's go, this is going to be us. This is us. And I'll always remember that, because I remember I was going into, it was in, October, November, prior to filing the IND. And I just had to take a deep breath and look at everybody and said, okay, I'm making this decision. Are we all on board with this decision? And I think that, Dara, do you agree that was one of the best things we did for this entire trial? Those reality checks. It was great.
Yeah, it's really powerful. I mean, just to speak to how you get to a decision like that and people feel good about it, is you really have to build trust with everyone. Instead of just calling in an advisor to give you some advice and then they go away, and then calling in your vendor and you talk to them and they go away. You really have to build a team. If people like working with you, if they're getting the information they need to think through the problems and to do their job, if they're getting information, you're sharing with them, you're making it fun, people want to stay. And the longer you have people stay with you, the better they get, the more powerful, they know more, they understand your product more. So I really can't emphasize enough that your culture has to go beyond the four walls. You have to build partnerships with everyone that you're working with. Then they want to keep working with you.
And I will bring up something that actually is of a concern to me now. I think that everything we have said is very true, but if you're going to scale your company, eventually you're going to want to bring all these different services inside if you want to grow into a large company. And so in some ways, you have to know when this crossover needs to happen and when the inside expertise could actually start to save you money and be, and understand you're building a valuable asset inside the company that's important to your investors. You have that obligation. And so in some ways, I feel a little bit of separation anxiety thinking about giving up my current team, which is actually our current team, because it's working so well. And so the challenge is going to be, can I ever replicate this inside a company?
You decide when to bring it into the company, and then the people that are helping you build that expertise will transfer it to the people you bring in and help them be successful. It's very hard to be that first person in the company being, in charge of GMP manufacturing or running clinical trials. It's hard to be that first person. And when it's been running a while, they should come in with the tools and the work, the systems, so that they can be successful. Right. And it's not so hard to be that first person because they have it working already.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. No, I totally agree.
So let's talk turkey on speed because, I'm looking and seeing we have maybe 12 or so minutes left in today's virtual executive roundtable. And I wanted to understand a little bit, Pam, about how you create that sense of urgency when you're outsourcing the expertise.
Okay, so this is a really hard thing. It's again, it's a fine line, between looking like a crazy person all the time and really using your personality, being yourself, being transparent, being curious, being both thankful and grateful, but by also being an expert in your own field and by giving to them as much as you get in return. So you bring them on board and now they're listening. And one of the things that, I did, which is very rare, a lot of people don't do this, is that most of our employees and our consultants never get to look at the company financials. And I know that's common in most companies, but I took a calculated risk and I showed everybody our financials so that they could understand how that even losing a week of time would cost us. And I wanted them to understand the effort it takes to raise money, so other people's money, in order to pay them what they deserve to be paid. And this is my primary job. And I'm asking for support from them, not only to do this job, but to understand that if they're shooting off an email instead of getting on the phone and calling when something's urgent, we're losing time. I think, and sadly, I still say those words almost at every meeting. Did you pick up the phone? And it's becoming sort of a broken record for me. But I think it's really critical to have that relationship with the employee saying, here's why I need to go this fast. And one of the first things I told people is we need to go fast because every week we're down, we're losing, 1/12 of our quarterly burn rate. So let's keep it moving. And then I made the commitment that I will try to turn around everything as fast as I ask you to turn it around. So I tried, and Dara, don't say this after this. I know I have one thing sitting on my desk that I have to do. I will do it this afternoon, I promise. But it's the commitment to, to be the person that you're expecting them to be, to turn it around and make their job easier. So I hope I never close a meeting without saying, okay, what can I do to make your job easier? So that's what I think.
Dara, do you have something to add?
Well, a few things. I mean, tactically, yes, all those things make things go faster. The other piece is really to set that ambitious goal and make sure everyone is really living and breathing it. We are filing our IND in this month. We are having our first patient in this month, because then you don't wait to do the things you need to do. Often teams underestimate how long it will take to finalize a protocol and get sites open. It's really, all they do is get to the IND and they forget about how long other things take. So, really setting big goals and everyone understanding them. And you know what? Everyone wants that. They want to know exactly what they're trying to push for. And then you can make trade-offs. You can have, if you have the right expertise, they'll know what you need to do early so you don't get delayed. A lot of the times that has to do with manufacturing, and what you can push off, what you can suggest to the FDA, you'll do later, you'll do for the next study, because that will also save you time. And that's an art, that sort of FDA whisperer, that's an art, but those two things, what do you start early so you don't get delayed, and what do you put off so you don't have to do it now?
With regard to CRO selection process, I know we kind of talked about, so you get this startup, you're getting your internal expertise, figuring out what you needed first, then you're figuring out what you need to outsource. But you also talked a little bit about when it comes to choosing the CROs, you were mentioning earlier about big versus small and having ones kind of aligned with you. Can you walk us through a little bit of some of the ways you went about the CRO selection process?
Sure. Let's talk about the clinical process, because it's a little bit less specialized than manufacturing, for example. You have a landscape of clinical research organizations that the team has worked with that are understood to be very respected, that people had good experience with, and then you put a very detailed RFP together so that you can compare them to each other when you get bids back. And you have to get, even if it seems like a waste of time, you really need to get a number of proposals. You need to find out, you could start with a request for information so that you can find out if they have the capabilities. For example, if it's a specialty kind of trial or a specialty kind of product like a cell therapy, you can do that first. But you reach out and then you narrow down to a handful, and you really get to know what they're going to be offering. A lot of times a big CRO, there's some benefits there. That they have a lot of staff to pull in. They've got a lot of staff to pull in, but that their proposal will reflect that, right? And the team that they bring in to meet you is very often the team that does not take care of you for the length of the trial. So it's important to understand that if you're, small company doing a phase 1, that you should be thinking hard about the CROs that can do phase 1s quickly. It's super nice for a big company to be able to go from phase 1, 2, 3, all the way through phase 4 with the same CRO. You don't have to transition to a new one. You don't need to, build a new database. There's a lot of efficiencies there, but a small company is going to be, kind of a blip on their balance sheet. So they're going to put the newbies on there. They're not going to put the best people on there, and except to maybe land the project. So it's just a good idea to talk to a variety and to make sure that the trial that you're doing and the kind of patients that they're used to handling, the kind of safety events, and then the size of your trial matches with their where they are.
And Pam, I know you kind of, when we talk about one-stop shop, they can be great, sure. But, I think you mentioned something in a previous conversation about paying for things that you don't end up using.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And this is a really great thing to learn, and it's not really evident. And this is my biggest fault, is that no matter how we compare the process, everything, I actually have really liked every team I've met from every company I've ever met. You know, that they have great people, they're professional, they're interesting. Then I had to learn it wasn't about me and what I liked. Those RFPs are critical, not because they tell you what they're going to do, but they also tell you what they're not going to do. And I think that's really important. And one experience that we had early on is everything looked great. And then when it got right down to, the blueprint and the negotiations, I realized, hey, they just dropped a whole big segment out. And I had to make the decision, did I still want them? And I have to go get another CRO to do this part of the project. What am I going to do here? So pay attention to, so sort of the integration of the teams and what this CRO brings and how you can, receive what they do and look for things that they're not promising to do. And I'll just tell you, my decision was to go with the CRO and then hire a different CRO to just do the thing they couldn't do. So that was a complicating factor, but it was way better to do that than, as Dara said, then get down the line and realize you needed something that you didn't have. So RFPs are, 100% the way I would go. And not only that, the expertise of people that develop RFPs, read RFPs, and read ultimately the statement of work and the contracts, and are helping you in the negotiations because they've seen it many, many times before.
Anything to add, Dara?
Well, that's also true with, we talked about clinical, but there's also very true with manufacturing. There's different varieties of payment structures that the manufacturing groups will require. The amount of time before they'll even start, and tech transfer is wildly different. And so having someone that can give a reality check of these things, like, yeah, this is padded. They're not ready for you yet. That's why it's going to take 6 months. I mean, having someone that really knows and has seen these and has pushed back on them, I think that's important. It'll save you money and time in the long run.
Since you brought up manufacturing, I know Pam has a story about a manufacturing story about you giving Pam a phone call saying, hey, I'm coming over.
Actually, it's one of the best, the best stories about Dara. This really epitomizes her personality. She called me and she said, and she's up in Seattle and I'm down in the Bay Area in California. Said, I'm coming to see you and I want you to set an afternoon aside and I want it to be very soon. So I was like, okay, I was really worried. I cleared my calendar. She arrives, we go into a conference room with a whiteboard, and she said, here's your clinical development pathway, but first I need to know, when do you plan to be in the market with your first product? And I thought about it for probably less time than I should have, and I said, I'm thinking May 2026. And she started writing on the whiteboard and reverse engineering my entire company from that market launch back to where we are right now. And we were in that conference room probably, 4 hours. And I think at one point we had to close the door. We might have been actually yelling at each other. Our voices
it was so
raised.
much fun. It doesn't get more fun than that. It was so fun. I love it.
It was, we learned so much about each other and about our respective companies. And I still remember what that whiteboard looks like because I left it up for, months afterwards. And I looked at it every day and I brought people in and I showed them, the employees in and the board in and showed them, this is the plan. And I'm telling you, Dara, I think that our board was never more impressed as when I said, yeah, we're working on a clinical development plan and it's pretty detailed. And they're like, wow, hardly anybody does that at this stage. It was great. I just really love that.
So let me ask a question about, because we're really near the end. Any advice for like the 3 biggest pitfalls for a startup CEO who's outsourcing these clinical trials to avoid?
One key point I have is don't overstaff too soon. So, your contract manufacturing and your study take a while to start, and you don't need the same level of staff when you're running and maintaining them as when you're starting up. And so be cautious about overstaffing too soon. If you have a key hire you can grab early, do it. That's always something that comes into play. But don't rush to fill all your FTEs on January 1 when you can fill them on December 15th of the same year.
Okay.
I agree with Dara. I think that one of the key pieces of advice I'd give people is that, so as a CEO, you can know a lot, but you have to understand, and I have this fault. I just ask the entire team. I overthink everything to the point where I'm laughing at myself because I'm overthinking it. But there's a point in time when you have to stop, make a decision. When you make that decision, whether you've overstaffed or understaffed, you have to recognize the mistake and deal with it immediately. Do not procrastinate. And be the fastest when you're getting the company back on track. Admit you're wrong, fix the problem, and move forward to bring that culture back together, to bring, the vision, back to the center of what you're doing. So it doesn't mean, flail around trying to, make quick decisions, but really in your heart, understand you've made a mistake, get the job done, and continue on on the right path. Everybody's going to make mistakes. Just fix it.
So we're up against it, and I just wanted to offer each of you the opportunity to give a parting pearl, which the last 2 kind of comments sounded like, but there are actual other parting pearls. So let's start with you, Dara. Parting pearl, for our audience today.
So it's about value. You will get the most value with the right mix of employees, partners, and vendors, and then building a culture of trust that leads to good decisions and good work. That will keep you on schedule, and it'll retain your value for your investors.
How about a parting pearl for you, Pam? Parting pearl for you, Pam. That's like, that's
Okay.
a tongue twister.
Yeah, say that 10 times fast. So I absolutely agree with Dara, and you can see the differences in the kind of companies that we run by what our pearls of wisdom are. But for me, it's really about remembering yourself and reminding the team that there is a patient at the end of every single decision that you make. It's about people. If you don't bring value to the investors, who are people, and other stakeholders who have participated in your success, if you don't keep employees happy and continue to achieve your milestones and to raise the funding and scale the business, you will never reach the patients. And, there's this saying that I think my dad told it to me when I was like 8 years old. And he said, it's a very famous saying, the team that wins is the team that makes the fewest mistakes. And so if you keep your core values intact, and if you work to mitigate the mistakes and to move forward as a pathway, I think that you will be successful.
Well, I'd like to thank Dara and Pam for making the time to participate and provide their perspective. We hope you find this information useful and encourage you to become a subscriber to Life Science Leader. Just go to www.lifescienceleader.com and look for the subscribe button on the top of the toolbar. I'm Rob Wright, and thanks for listening, watching, reading, and most importantly, contributing. Thanks, Pam. Thanks, Dara.
Thank you. It was so fun.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.